Well, Chris, let's grasp a tiny straw of optimism here, testament perhaps to the human spirit which we've seen demonstrated so much by Ukrainians in so many ways these last weeks. It's this: there are people coming back now to regain and take up their lives again in the capital city because they judge it safe enough to do so. Not for us to judge whether that optimism is well placed at the moment, but it is happening, tiny numbers, and that's certainly a change to the scenes and the exodus we've seen from this city in recent weeks. Because around it there is evidence growing on the ground to the northeast, to the northwest, that the Russians are indeed pulling back, probably simply to regroup and maintain their war in the eastern region of Donbass, of course. But that is happening. But at the same time, that is just ground forces. The Russian military machine maintains a very competent means of picking its targets, frankly, at will across this and other cities. And we've seen that right here in the capital today. Because of the Ukrainian military censorship laws, it's pretty limited as to what we can say about what happened here today at the moment. And of course, the now familiar warning, I'm afraid, that some of you may find some of the images in our report tonight disturbing.
US intelligence sources say around a fifth of Russian ground forces have pulled back from around Kyiv. But the city is still open to missile and artillery attack. And this is what skepticism looks like, Kyiv style. The beloved statue of Queen Oleg on Mikhailivska Square being sandbagged. But the Russians are retreating, we said. Why bother with all this?
У світі взагалі досі віри є. Хто? Недалекі політики, держави, які знаходяться в залежності від Росії. А ми ніколи не вірили, розумієте? Ніколи Україна не вірила.
Їм віри нема. Вони казали, що нападати не будуть. Але все зробили навпаки.
12 miles northwest of Kyiv, the once agreeable commuter town of Irpin. For several weeks now, a focus of Mr. Putin's special military operation, also known as his failure to take the capital of Ukraine. Dead and alive, the civilian victims have been slowly emerging from its rubble day after day after day. Now it is a largely silent warscape of destruction. As shells rain in, children shelter under a flyover for cars long gone, awaiting evacuation. North of Irpin itself, Ukrainian soldiers patrol villages abandoned by the Russians, who left too fast even to retrieve their dead.
М'ясо. Мені, чесно говоря, отих там скільки дітей просто валяється, м'ясо їхнього. Їх просто на бум послали, хіба так воюють? Дивіться, це виходить.
Safety of sorts, escapees from the hell of Irpin finally reached the suburbs this morning of the capital and a reception centre for onward travel.
Ну, потому половина боится просто из-за того, что по дороге может что случиться с ними. Часть просто не хотят покидать свои дома, часть, я не знаю, просто они уже привыкли.
Dmitry Bogdanov finally got out with his elderly parents. They'd like to stay in Kyiv. To them, this is tranquility itself after Irpin.
Debris, and rubble everywhere.
Yeah.
Just outright everywhere, rubble, debris. It's broken. I won't say completely, but mostly. It's extremely dangerous. It's, see, those say high caliber guns, howitzers. See? No,
yeah, howitzers, shells, artillery, yes.
They shell and shell permanently, day after day, repeatedly, permanently, days and nights. And that was absolutely.
On the streets of Irpin, he met the Russian army face to face and survived. Just.
That glance from him, that was the beast, the glance of a beast. See? I understand them. They are fighting. They were killing. They had been killing.
He says one fired shots in the ground next to him and they stole his mobile phone.
I understand that.
to each a destination according to experience. So fleeing to Spain, Larisa Hlushko, but leaving her mother and a son in the army here.
Я знаю, що я ніколи не побачу маму. Я не зможу її побачити. Я не знаю, чи побачу я своїх дітей, які залишились там.
And yet, from the Lviv to Kyiv Express, a trickle of people coming the other way, coming home now.
Багато часу пройшло, треба вертатися, працювати, щось робити. Ще все спокійно, відвоюємо територію назад.
Bye-bye. Spirit and optimism, the Kyiv way.
Well, another attempt is underway to get thousands of civilians out from the living hell in Mariupol, as Ukraine said Russian forces had slowed a humanitarian convoy from getting through. At the same time, Moscow has been issuing more threats to the West. Vladimir Putin warning what he called unfriendly countries that they must pay for gas imports in Russian rubles or supplies would be cut altogether. Jonathan Rugman reports.
It's hard to believe any people still live here in Mariupol, let alone an estimated 170,000 of them. The mayor claims almost 5,000 are now dead. Whatever the truth, one man lies buried in a patch of ground outside his apartment block. His friend says he was shot in the throat as they were out driving together, and that he died 5 minutes later. This is a city where the only daily commute is for drinking water, and where the choice is a stark one: either wait for the Russians to let them leave, or hunker down for the duration of Vladimir Putin's war. With no gas to cook with, Victor throws what he has into a pot close to his nearest bomb shelter. A bit of cabbage, he says, some potatoes, beetroot and tomato paste. And this man, Mikhail Mizintsev, could decide his fate. He's the Russian general in charge of this siege, who was sanctioned by the British government today. Russia's version of this war avoids the suffering on the ground, preferring to show attack helicopters in blue skies without a wrecked building in sight. But none of this can mask several awkward truths: that there's been no quick victory for Vladimir Putin, who underestimated Ukrainian resistance and Western sanctions with it. And today the Russian leader, looking isolated as usual, retaliated, giving Europe less than 24 hours notice before he could cut off the supply of gas.
Сегодня мною подписан указ, который устанавливает правила торговли российским природным газом с так называемыми недружественными государствами. Чтобы приобрести российский природный газ, они должны открыть рублевые счета в российских банках.
Russian paratroopers who had served in Ukraine were today compared with the heroes of the Second World War. And with Mr. Putin still shaping this domestic narrative himself, his approval rating has risen to 83%, according to a vaguely reliable poll. Western intelligence agencies are deliberately upping their counter-narrative in response, hoping to puncture the president's feel-good bubble so he sues for peace.
We've seen Russian soldiers, short of weapons and morale, refusing to carry out orders, sabotaging their own equipment, and even accidentally shooting down their own aircraft.
But we've also seen this: the destruction of Mariupol, directed by the same Russian general who led the ruination of Aleppo in Syria. This, a city Vladimir Putin wants so badly that he's prepared to destroy it, with ever giving it back hardly seeming like an option.
Now, before the war broke out back in January, our reporter Porrick O'Brien was in Mariupol, where he spent time filming with two teachers at a local elementary school in the east of the city. Since then, as the city has been reduced to ruins, he's been trying to find out what happened to them both.
Діти, що ми робимо, якщо пролунав обстріл? Будь ласка.
Треба сідати під парти.
Добре.
On the 25th of January this year, a month exactly before this war started, we visited school number 5 on the eastern outskirts of Mariupol.
Діти, увага, обстріл!
We filmed with Class 6B as the 12-year-olds were put through drills on what to do in case of shelling.
ходити до роботи було дуже важко.
We interviewed two teachers, Svetlana, the head, and Ludmila, in charge of the primary school. You can tell a surprising amount about pride in profession by the way people introduce themselves.
Мене звати Кальсіна Світлана, я працюю директором комунального закладу, спеціалізована школа 1-3 ступенів номер 5 з поглибленим вивченням окремих предметів.
А я Семерня Людмила, вчитель початкових класів.
At the time, Svetlana and Ludmila didn't really think that a full-scale war was on its way to them. 7 years before, the neighborhood and the school had been shelled. And lightning doesn't strike twice, right? Mariupol before, and Mariupol 2 weeks ago. This drone footage shows what's left of District East, where the school is. The area not far from Donbass was one of the first parts of the city the Russian army moved into at the beginning of March. Back in January, we asked the teachers this question.
I just wonder if Russian tanks, God forbid, rolled down the street tomorrow, how would this neighborhood react, and how would you react?
Залишилися, поруч би стояли, залишилися би.
Ми у 15-му році не покинули цю школу, і зараз не покинемо.
Тут наші діти,
наша сім'я.
Наша сім'я, наша робота. Крім нас ніхто не зробить.
Отак би взялися за руки і стали би перед танками, так?
For 2 weeks now, we've been trying to find out what happened to Svetlana and Ludmila. It's been difficult because telephone networks in the city were targeted by the Russians at the beginning of the offensive. This is the automated answer you now get when trying to ring a telephone number there.
Нападением фашистской России на Украину и ведением войны данный звонок заблокирован. Российский звонок пошел.
As friends and colleagues of the teachers escaped the city and moved to areas with network coverage, we started to connect with people. Via social media, we finally did manage to communicate with Svetlana. She said she'd escaped Mariupol and was safe, but had heard nothing from her friend Ludmila.
Дети, внимание, обстрел.
War creates information black holes, and into the vacuum, disinformation. Ludmila knew all about that because a manipulated version of our original report, featuring the teachers, was used by a Russian news program in an attempt to demonstrate that Western media were exaggerating the prospect of war. The Russians did invade, of course. The bombardment of Ludmila's neighborhood was not fake news, it was real. One of the reasons we know that is because this afternoon we finally made contact with Maria, a relative of Ludmila.
Погибла она 4 марта от осколочного ранения. В соседний дом прилетел боеприпас, снаряд, то есть он разорвался, и Людмила Анатольевна получила смертельное ранение и умерла, мгновенно, можно сказать. Вот, была похоронена в том же доме, в котором она и погибла, в приусадебной части, в огороде, по-другому не получилось.
How will you remember her?
Воспоминания самые лучшие, самые светлые. Это был прекрасный человек, добрее, позитивнее. Просто не было людей.
One of the last prophetic things Ludmila said to us back in January was this.
А мені нікуди бігти. У мене тут моя сім'я, тут моя земля і тут мій рідний дім. Ми у 15-му році не покинули цю школу і зараз не покинемо.
Porrick O'Brien on the story of one teacher in Mariupol. Well, earlier I spoke to Nadia Navka, who has spent her whole life in Mariupol. Like many others, she had gone to the drama theatre in the city for shelter. On the 16th of March, she was in the kitchen there making bread with her husband when it was hit. Ukraine believes up to 300 people died there. The couple are now safely out of the area, and it's important testimony because the Russians have repeatedly claimed there were no civilians in that theatre and that it was being used by the Ukrainian military. In a city almost totally destroyed, the bombing of the theatre in Mariupol is one of the most shocking moments of the war and possibly the most deadly. Nadia Navka and her husband joined those taking shelter there on March the 6th, when their home was destroyed.
Когда мы туда попали, нас было около 600. Потом разрасталась эта цифра каждый день, все больше и больше подвозилось людей. Кто-то сам приходил, кого-то привозили с разгромленных, разбомбленных домов. И мы дошли до 1500. У нас максимальная цифра была 1500. На момент удара это было около 800. Потому что очень много за 2 дня до этого выехали.
So what do you remember about what happened when the bomb went off?
Момент удара я не помню. Мне кажется, что я потеряла сознание, потому что очень сильный удар был и не один по голове. Муж помнит, произошло это очень быстро, в доли секунды, и он помнит звук движения стен.
When did you come back to consciousness? How long, what's the first thing you remember after the bomb went off?
Я пришла в себя и не видела, не слышала ничего. Сознание, я понимала, что я в сознании, но полный вакуум, ничего не вижу, ничего не слышу. Постепенно быстро вернулся слух, услышала крик мужа и подруги, которая была с нами в комнате, что «помогите, мы нечем дышать, нет воздуха». Потом постепенно прояснилось зрение, я увидела остатки комнаты. Первая мысль была, и в этом можно было выжить. Я начала откапывать сама мужа и подругу, начала откапывать одна. Никого не было в нашем крыле и близко. Я не могла докричаться ни до кого. И я им освободила лица, чтобы они могли дышать. И к этому моменту прибежал племянник моей подруги. И он помогал крупные куски уже с них снимать, потому что над ними было больше, чем полметра обломков стены.
How long did it take you to dig him out?
Минут 30.
Were many people buried?
Не знаю. К тому моменту, когда я смогла выйти с мужем и с подружкой, то уже разбежалась основная масса, и, честно говоря, ходить на экскурсию по драмтеатру, смотреть, что там дальше, было уже невозможно. Уже все было в дыму, уже зайти было опасно очень.
Do you think there were many people in the basement?
Да, и попал снаряд именно в подвал под сценой, там, где были, как люди, казалось, безопасно, женщины, дети. Все чувствовали себя в безопасности в подвале.
Many in this war speak of being unable to feel anything when they've been under attack. So what was it like to be in this most monstrous of bombings?
Ничего, у меня не было, я не чувствовала ни страха, ни паники, ни адреналина пресловутого, о котором все говорят. Я не чувствовала абсолютно ничего. У меня была задача выкопать мужа, найти маму. И я шла как робот по этой задаче. Полная, абсолютно эмоциональный паралич, абсолютный. Ничего не чувствовала.
How do you feel now, though? Now that you can think what happened there and that other people died there, how does that make you feel now?
Нет, я пока не решаюсь возвращаться к тем событиям морально. Я их как бы осознаю вроде бы, да, но осмысливать их я пока не могу. Я пока не чувствую себя в безопасности. Закончится война, я буду знать, что все в безопасности, и тогда я буду эти масштабы понимать. Сейчас я даже боюсь об этом думать.
Were you or your husband injured at all? Were you hurt by the falling debris?
У меня большие, но заживут синяки. Удар, след остался. Гарри Поттер, я говорю. девочка, которая выжила.
There is nothing left now in Mariupol. So when people in the future ask what was Mariupol, what would you say?
Любимым, растущим, развивающимся. Он преображался просто на глазах. Мы перспективный город были и очень красивый.
Nadia Navka, the girl who lived in the theatre in Mariupol. Well, I've also been speaking to Sergei Orlov, the deputy mayor of that city, and I began by asking him about the humanitarian corridors that the International Red Cross are hoping to open.
We all should understand that it's absolutely impossible to reach Mariupol, even now. So all the evacuation that we are talking about is evacuation of Mariupol citizens who is located in nearest villages of Mariupol and Berdyansk city. So it's citizens who did their best to reach somehow in nearest villages and Berdyansk. I can confirm that column is moving, so it started to move before afternoon and till 6 p.m. They reach Berdyansk and will collect citizens, Mariupol citizens in Berdyansk tomorrow, and will go back with our citizens from Berdyansk. We hope for that.
There have been talk that some people have been taken from the Mariupol area into Russian-controlled territory or even Russia. Is that happening?
We can confirm, and it's great numbers at the moment. So as Russia temporarily occupies some territory outskirts Mariupol, it's mostly eastern outskirts, northern and partly northwest outskirts. So they are making deportation of our citizens to temporary uncontrolled Donetsk Republic and to Russia, and it continues each day. And altogether, it's a big amount of our citizens who were deported to DNR and Russia.
Because there is also talk of people going through camps where they're being filtered, filtration camps.
Yes, we can confirm. So Russia pushes our citizens to evacuate and make deportation of our citizens, and it goes through at least 2 camps. So they go by walking to seashore, and Russia transfers them to some other villages, Novozovsk, Sopino, and they are waiting in camps which are in schools, mostly at schools. They're waiting for filtration, and it can take up to 3, 4, 5 days. Its filtration is mostly to find Ukrainian-oriented, some patriots, some citizens who loves Ukraine, and some of them, after that filtration, goes to prison, and most part of our citizens then they make deportation to Russia, to depressive regions and town of Russia.
How many civilians are now left in Mariupol, and how much of the city is now controlled by the Russians?
We estimate that about 150,000 citizens is still in Mariupol. You can imagine their lives, so they are like mouses. All of them live underground. It's shelter, bomb shelter, any space below earth. So to have a possibility to survive in continuous bombing, shelling, and so on.